Greetings, friends. So my friend wanted me to discuss a document that he gave me. So I said, sure. And he gave me a donation. So that was very generous of him. This document he gave me has 3 paragraphs. The title he's chosen is Climate Change. Even the name is fake. Now, that raised my eyebrows a bit because, of course, I do believe that the climate changes and has changed. But I don't think he didn't. I think we're on the same page because he explains as he begins. He says Canada's Supreme Court ruled on March 25th, 2021, that climate change is real and it is caused by greenhouse gas. So I think that's what he's getting to, is that the fakeness, although I might not have put it that way, but I think by calling it fake, you're getting to the idea that it's propped up by the establishment, and the word climate change is used in a particular way. Now, as for YouTube censoring me over how I talk about climate change, I don't know. I guess we'll find out. I don't think it's quite the hot topic that certain other subjects are at the moment. It's just not catching the attention the way certain other issues are, but we'll see. But anyways, he says that most people believe that heat comes from the sun. I mean, sure, yeah, I believe that heat comes from the sun. The surface of the moon has no greenhouse gas, yet it is hot enough to bake a cake. Then he's providing these simple equations here. The Earth's heat radiation is 1,380 watts per square meter. And he provides an equation which I don't understand. This goes right over my head, but he concludes that this gives the temperature in absolute degrees of, which gets to about 122 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature of the moon, I guess, on the surface of the moon in direct sunlight. We move on, and he's discussing how does meteorology become climate perversion. Movable type, he says, the kind of type you move around in little pieces that you would set in the printing press. This technology came into commercial use sometime around 1450. I mean, we know about the Gutenberg printing press that preceded, not by very long, the Protestant Reformation, because Martin Luther was able to print his works on a massive scale, and the reformers that followed him. But I'm just adding that in there. So this method of using movable type continued up to the 1970s, though heavy machinery was used for large contracts, such as the New York Times, circa the year 1900. Everything changed when the computer and its monitor came along. The publishing business became more lucrative and just as competitive. There was a big demand for sensational material, such as quack science. Well, I mean, there's always been a demand for that sort of stuff, but yeah, the advent of mass printing made it more widely available. The cool 1970s, does he mean cool in terms of climatically, like the temperature? This decade began with wild, fantastic predictions of a new ice age. Another ice age, Time magazine, June 1974. I guess he's referring to a certain issue which talked about another ice age. Newsweek warned that the temperature decline, not temperature rise, has taken the planet about a sixth of the way towards the ice age average. Next, there was the heat wave of the 1990s, which was of no concern to consensus science, consensus in quotation marks. The mainstream simply changed the channel to global warming. So when he's saying that it was the warming, but it was of concern to the consensus, meaning the fake consensus, right? Meaning not the real scientists, but it was of concern to the institutional scientists and their cronies. And yes, it was a warmer decade, especially the year 1998. I remember I was 12 years old in 1998, and everyone was talking about how it was the warmest year in history. And for good measure, the mainstream declared that the debate was over, meaning the question of whether the world was warming, I guess. Greenhouse gas global warming has no theory and no experimental verifications. Well, I mean, you can find a theory to justify it, but there's plenty of other theories which say it's not happening. And as for the experimental verification, yeah, I mean, people can make. That's the problem with science, is the reproducibility crisis, where it's you can't trust the scientists anymore because they have their own agenda and not the truth. That's the problem with science. So you can make experiments that could show that the world is warming. You could make other experiments that show that it's cooling. But if you trust the scientists and you trust the work over time, there's a good argument to be made, indeed, that there is no greenhouse gas global warming. You can definitely take that view, and I would tend towards that view. Multinational media referred to this as climate change. Well, they referred to it as global warming before, and they were talking about the ozone layer back in the 90s. So they changed the terms they use over time. Tactically, this thing has no definition, so that there are a myriad of hidden agendas and schemes which generally have nothing to do with the environment. So climate change has no precise definition. Exactly. It's not even global warming, which was a specific thing about warming. Oh, climate change. He concludes in the final paragraph, who benefits from climate change? You can judge for yourself. This text is from Real Women of Canada. It's in this, I don't know what you call this. It's not a magazine. Can you see that? It says reality. It says reality. Realistic, equal, active for life. But then it does say Real Women of Canada. I don't know. And there's an article that he has included a segment of. And this segment is reading that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau swaggers about throwing taxpayers' money to his friends. For example, Trudeau's former chief of staff, Gerald Butts, a close friend since university, who resigned his position in the Prime Minister's office over the SNC-Lavalin scandal, had previously been the CEO of the environmental lobby group World Wildlife Fund, or WWF, but not wrestling, so it sounds funny. And they had their logo as like a panda bear. This organization, the World Wildlife Fund, opposes the oil and gas industry. Justin Trudeau's government gave the World Wildlife Fund $4 million, Canadian dollars I'm assuming, between 2016 and 2020. Butts was also an advisor to former Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty and his Green Energy Act, which led to a 70% increase in electricity rates for Ontario residents. After his resignation from the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Butts returned to Trudeau's inner circle in late July 2019 as part of Trudeau's 2019 election campaign team, and they went on to win the election again. Butts was next appointed in May 2020 as head of a Liberal task force called Task Force for Resilient Recovery to recommend post-pandemic policies to reset the agenda on green energy and climate change. The task force issued its report in August 2020 calling upon the federal government to spend $55 billion over 5 years on clean energy, as well as measures to deal with climate change. The task force came with 5 bold moves for a green recovery. The word bold is misleading, as a task force recommendations could more accurately be described as wasteful and futile. So there you have. But I would say that giving the World Wildlife Fund $4 million, that's not a lot of money in today's world. So I mean, you could probably find much bigger amounts of money, like hundreds of millions or billions of dollars that governments are throwing around. Like how much money is the U.S. government giving to what are those like military aircraft or missile manufacturers? I'm forgetting. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but like those weapons manufacturers, something like that. But just to give you an idea, but all the corruption, but still, that does show that there was money going around. I don't know what the budget of the World Wildlife Fund is, how big it is, but I was once canvassed by like a World Wildlife Fund, a volunteer on the street back in the day, and but no, I didn't donate to them. So this is just a tiny example of what can be going on in the government, but it points to the bigger idea that there's agendas which, by consenting to the green agenda and increased carbon taxes, we're just helping these big corporate and government players settle their own scores. Because I don't necessarily have too much sympathy for some big energy corporation. Like how are they helping us? I mean, sure, they're producing jobs and they're doing a good thing in the West, and I'm not against that. I'm pro oil and gas, but at the same time, am I supposed to trust one side or the other in this fight? No, not. But I don't trust the government, and obviously, if it's raising energy prices in Ontario, like that was an insane thing. That was one of the reasons that Kathleen Wynne, the former premier of, or however you say that word, premier of Ontario, she got kicked out of power partly because of that. I mean, just to conclude, I would share my thoughts that, yeah, I could see the world getting cooler. When I was a kid, or when I was like 15, 16 years ago, around that time, I remember April being a warmer month than it was today. Now, I haven't looked at the actual records, so I could be entirely wrong, but I've talked about this with my friend Will, and he agrees that April and springtime in general, there was a real spring back then in Toronto. Now it's just cooler and it's not very nice, not a very nice month overall. May, I mean, it's still cold. It's not what I remember. It's not what I remember as a kid. Why do I have this impression of April being a warmer month than it is today? I don't know. So that's just food for thought. Hasta luego, amigos.